observation. Consider myself a Danish Texan. My dad's from Sulphur Springs, Texas. My mom's from Østerbro in Copenhagen. And I just want to say I'm super impressed with all the Danes here. I knew that Christian was speaking this morning, but so if you're Danish, let me hear you. Oh, yeah. All right. And let me hear all the Sulphur Springs service designers. I'll let my dad know it's not the powerhouse I thought it'd become in the service design world. So what we are here to talk about today is the implementation dilemma and how to build a sustainable growth engine within large established companies. Munib and I were talking at the break. We're actually pretty jazzed at the conversations from this morning of the presentations. A lot of what Billy's talking about with Citi, you'll see represented here. Not because we worked with Citi, but because he's really smart. Okay. The work that Ryan was talking about. On this stage, we attended the session with the team from Gatorade and Smart, Gensler, and Eli Lilly, and they talked about building from within, the importance of prototyping, and the importance of space. So I think that a lot of today is aligned with some of our thinking. I'm the Vice President of Customer Experience and Innovation Capability within Continuum, so I lead the practice helping large companies build their internal capacity, helping them create, launch, and scale new ideas and multi-touch point experiences. And as such, I get a chance to meet with companies across geography and across industry, and the #1 issue that they have is not sourcing ideas, not generating ideas, not identifying new opportunities, but getting those ideas out into market and getting them commercialized, and doing that as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
So, I lead the design innovation team in one of the iconic financial services organizations in Australia, called AMP. Our main business is retirement savings, life insurance, and financial advice. We are the main kind of leaders in these 3 areas in Australia. So 2 years ago, we invited Continuum to help us to focus on a specific customer problem. And then John and I spent a lot of time working together on resolving this problem, as well as understanding how we actually build innovation capabilities in the organization. And what we turned out to find that actually implementation component was really difficult. So, and that's why we actually started consulting academic literature, given my background that I teach creativity and innovation in Australian Graduate School of Business. We started digging into academic literature, and as well as actually talking to a number of companies here in the US and Australia, try to understand how they actually handle this problem. And I'm really pleased that, as John mentioned, that this morning and today's conference overall was actually addressing a lot of bits and pieces that we have been talking with the organizations and consulting literature as well. And then we will give you some model how we think it should work. It's working, at least in organization that I work, which is AMP. But it is, I believe, this is the kind of starting point that we can all build together this model further, which will actually help us to be much more definite when we start working on implementation of ideas.
All right. So this is a work in progress in terms of evolving, so feel free to tweet, email, call, text with feedback. My mom is on Twitter, and she thinks I'm really smart and special, so just be kind with your feedback. So. All right, so everyone in this room knows this, and large companies are feeling this, right? You either disrupt or get disrupted. We have high customer expectations. We have a tremendous amount of information and the transparency that comes with that information. We have new entrants. We have startups. We have a global economy and the competition that comes with that. So what does that mean? That means that if you're a large company, or in many cases, entire industries, you have to adapt. You have to figure out how to address these challenges and do that in a sustainable way. And a lot of this we've talked about today across sessions. This is great news for all of us, right? I'm particularly fond of the upper right solution, but there are many other solutions. There's many more beyond these, right? So innovation toolkits and design thinking training across employees. Hiring designers in-house, hiring consultancies, crowdsourcing, corporate venturing, building innovation centers and labs internally. There's some tremendous energy and excitement going on there. Here's my concern. All this activity, all this action does not necessarily equal outcomes. And by that we mean impact in the market. We're, 80 blocks from the Apollo. And those of you that remember the Sandman, that's what I sweat as a designer, which is we have tremendous opportunity to reshape the world and drive real change in businesses. But if we don't figure out how to move our ideas, our new experiences into the market effectively, repeatedly, consistently for big companies, the CEO is going to say, that's great that I hired designers, that's great that I have some nice furniture, a nice space, or I have some training, but I'm not getting business results. And just like the Sandman, he's going to come sweeping along and move on to whatever the next thing is, and that'd be a travesty. What does that mean? That means that we think that companies need to focus much more on the implementation side because they can get the ideas from a lot of places, as we talked about, right? So our central thesis is that we believe that established companies underestimate their ability to create or acquire new ideas, and they overestimate their ability to implement them. And that makes sense, right? An operating company is a giant implementation engine. It is a machine that pumps things out. But the problem is that those ideas that are truly valuable, the ones that are meant to get out into the market and really drive growth, drive customer delight, don't fit well with this traditional implementation. And this is why. The best ideas are also seen as the riskiest ideas. So what we talk about at Continuum is this notion of the scary zone. It's just past incremental change, which is your chocolate flavor, you're now with lemon scent, you're half point off the mortgage with a delightful concierge that a competing bank or financial services company offers. And that fits well within an organization. The other flavor of innovation that companies can frequently revel in is what we call cold fusion. And those are those far-off ideas that are grand and exciting. They have a tremendous amount of sex appeal, like me. I'm the cold fusion. But here's the challenge. They are technically unfeasible in the current state. They're too expensive, or they're waiting for mass adoption. And so there's a lot of companies that rely on this kind of innovation because they can check the box and say, look, we are innovating. It's not our fault that we can't do anything about it. The time hasn't come yet. And companies frequently sit between those two. But the real value, the ones that will drive growth in an organization, the ones that are most delightful to customers are the ones that sit in this risky area called the scary zone, which are ideas that can be made today. They just don't work easily with existing structures. So if we look at this as the silos, right, incremental change works well within the traditional bureaucracy structure, committees, policies, procedures, roles, responsibilities, and all the other silos and things that come along with a company working at scale. And cold fusion is so untethered from adoption and implementation at a large company that it's much more blue sky. But the scary zone, that's where it messes with silos, it messes with traditional implementation.
So the scary zone ideas doesn't play well with the structures, and especially in the large established organizations. So I'm sure there are many factors what influencing that, but we actually identified these 4 groups. So the first one is usually companies are focusing on inside-out problem, which means what is the problem within the organization and how we see the world, neglecting customer value or understanding customer. And we talk about this empathy a lot. The second one is, well, we actually traditionally jump into solution mode, immediately implementing and scaling up business without actually having proper conviction and test with the customers. Is this really valuable to customers? And that's why very often we spend a lot of money, but we don't know what is the outcome, what is the final outcome that we can expect. So, and especially traditional organizations with a long time in existence, they actually create a lot of processes, procedures, risk procedures as well, which are constraining and narrowing down the maneuver to actually change some things. And therefore, it is very hard to actually bring the scary zone idea into that environment because there are many constraints attached to it. And finally, the fourth one is that companies measuring success in traditional ways. So what's the cash flow that I'm generating, how much profit I'm making, what's my return on investment, and things like that. So we're not saying that it's wrong to measure in that way, but probably there are some steps between we start actually measuring that after we get the conviction that we are focusing on the right problem. So this is where we come to this central part of what we want to talk to you is the implementation dilemma. We see two things. One is the new ideas taken and implemented in traditional way, how we do this today, or new ideas taken from scary zone and implemented in the new way. So let's remind ourselves what is actually a traditional way of doing it. So we have a new idea. We usually put this in strat plan, and we say this is the problem with we think it will work. Put it in strat plan, and then we select a group of people, build the business case based on accountants' assumptions, then start actually working, hand over to the team to develop the initiative. Halfway through, team actually is stuck with a couple of questions. So, well, what's the customer value proposition here? How it's actually, what should I develop in the line with customer proposition? Or what's the customer desirability? Are we actually addressing with this development the right thing that we need to do? Do we have enough resources and things like that? And this is where risk assessment starts playing and saying, well, we need to actually, to avoid the risk, we need to deliver these initiatives on time and on budget. So what we usually do in that situation? We start de-scoping the project. And we deliver that on time and on budget, but we don't actually move the dial much for customers, but we don't move the dial for the organization too. So this is the situation that we call nice landing, wrong airport. So to avoid nice landing, wrong airport, what we actually found it works well is that we actually focus on the problem, and then we do risk assessment. Are we actually addressing the right problem first? And in doing that, the best tool is actually to build a customer case instead of business case at the beginning. So then what we found is we're working very well when we start actually building these ideas based on customer experience and customer understanding, prototyping this idea, making sure that we are convinced that we are going into the right trajectory, placing smaller bets in the market test. And then once we have a conviction, we actually start thinking about how can we build a business case, because it will be developed on factual situation, not assumptions, accountants' assumptions. What we learn through these processes. And that's what we believe actually creating more than just moving dial a bit. It creates significant change for the organization. So what's the implementation solution? So we believe that this second approach in creating environment, that some of the speakers already mentioned these things, that we need to create new ecosystem or some kind of infrastructure or whatever capabilities. But what we're saying that the central part of, and the good news for this implementation solution is that we don't need to actually change people, resources and things like that. We just need to reposition them in different way. So repositioning in different way means that we work on this to change the mindset that whatever we build, it should start from customer in center of attention. So then we actually we develop some approaches, tools and methods that people can practice, and they talk the same language. Then avoid any further confusion. So we believe that central part of this implementation solution is what we call that an implementation pod. An implementation pod has two main components. One is what we call that core team of dedicated people sitting in that pod, collocated, and working together in the way I described earlier. This is the new way of doing so, placing smaller bets, understanding customers, and things like that. But we also say around this team should be, as you see on the picture, it would be extended team, which is actually dialing up and down work as required for the project dynamics. So that's what we believe that will actually turn this and then situation from actually focusing just on what we believe the internal measures and internal values, more on customer values too. So there are three critical factors, elements of this implementation pod, and three enablers, and Jon and I will address them in a little bit more details now.
So the three critical elements of an individual pod are an empowered team, physical space, and a common approach and tools across them. First, the empowered team. An empowered team is a core team of 5 to 7 individuals pulled from the core business. And these team members are dedicated full-time on the pod through the course of the development of this offer or this multi-touch point experience. A client once told me that availability is not a competency, which I think is an excellent point. So these people that you bring in need to be the best of the best. It has to hurt a little to pull them in, but they're also gonna come in and contribute much more rapidly than if you have what we call in Texas the tallest midget. So you want a great core team, 5 to 7 dedicated full time. They're led by a design lead and a business lead. So those are co-leaders of this particular pod, and both of them report into an offer owner. The offer owner is a senior leader, never more than 2 levels away from the C-suite, and they are held accountable and are responsible for getting this offer into the market to test. Could fail, but the idea is to get it into the market to test. Now, a lot of times, and especially even on this road show that Munib and I have been on, concert T-shirts are on the way. The roadshow we've been on, we talked to a bunch of different organizations. The idea of an empowered team sounds on the surface quite common, but by this we actually mean no sign-offs with functional leadership while they're working in the pod. So every team member is contributing and representing their functional area. They're making the trade-offs, they're making the decisions, and they're doing that with no running back to their functional leadership until we get into market and are looking at potentially scaling the solution. This drives speed, and this drives expediency in terms of protecting the consumer intent around the idea.
So what you see on this picture here is an example at AMP that we have a core team and extended team working together and discussing in the pod, where they're discussing the updated work that they have been, the core team was developing. So, and then after this, there were kind of decision-making point what's the next step for the project.
Second critical element is physical space. And as designers, you all know this, and I think quite a few of us take this for granted. I know that I do, given the space that we work out loud. But in large organizations, that's taken for granted. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the importance of this. I think it's a given and commonly understood that you have to drive behavior change if you want to drive innovation in a large company. But so often, behavior change comes in the abstract. Start acting collaborative, start doing this, start doing that, think out loud, share more, build upon each other's ideas. But in doing some research, we actually found this model that's fantastic, and it actually reinforces some of the thinking and learning that we had been doing, which is if you change the environment that people are working in, they start to change their behavior. It reinforces, it reminds, it encourages, and that's fundamental to working as a pod. So critical to a pod is that 5 to 7 member team and their co-leads co-locate into a shared space. They work out loud, whiteboards, foam core, and the like. They bring in their extended team members that are experts in various functions as necessary to help evolve the idea. And importantly, you now have a different governance model. Your steering committee members no longer get a pre-read and quarterly sit down in a boardroom and you report out to them with Harvey balls and red and green and yellow lights. Instead, they come down to that physical space. They have a stand-up where they're getting the updates from the core team. They're understanding the nuances of both the business requirements and the customer requirements, and they make real-time decisions with each other there, and that drives speed to market.
So what we found amazing, actually, this theory, we found this later. We established this innovation center at AMP 2.5 years ago, and then we hoped that people would start collaborating. And we were surprised with the changing, how people change their behavior in working. So within 2 weeks, we had 10 or 12 teams working in this space, actually not sitting at the chairs, standing in front of the whiteboards and using markers and discussing and collaborating. 2.5 years later, we have multiple places like this across the organization. On every floor, we now have whiteboards, and I can see many meetings rooms are empty because people are standing in front of whiteboards and actually discussing the problem for the project and how they developed it. What you see in this space here is this is core and extended team, people from nine different disciplines across the organization, debating what's on the whiteboard and what's the artifacts that they have been developed. But also all of them, in some point of time, were visiting these customers that you see kind of blurry pictures of, on the wall on the other side.
And the third critical element of an individual pod is a common approach and tools. So I want to unpack this a little bit. The critical takeaway on this is that there's no handover. So you think of the game of telephone when you were a child, you whisper something, red circle, and it comes out as a green rhombus. Oh, it was Gary, you know. The idea here is that there's never a handoff. The core team, business, design, all the critical functions start at the beginning in framing and understanding the challenge, all the way through to in-market test. So at no point does one or the other side of the equation disappear. They work all the way through. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that because of that, there's different roles that happen. So the emphasis or the level of ownership and decision-making moves from front end and what those customer requirements are to the business-led side as you move into business requirements. Other than that, they work collaboratively throughout the whole process.
So what we learn in this process that just establishing these pods doesn't work if we don't actually create these enablers. So what we found is kind of three large groups of that. So one is training people. Second one is new risk appetite, and third one is radical transparency. So the first one, training people. So what we found actually that in order to empower people and give them authority and then actually have a new way of working in the pods, in these spaces, and taking new approaches and methods and tools require people to be informed about it and then be knowledgeable about it. What we found in the early stage of development that core team who was very familiar how to run prototypes, how to do things, how to run tests and things like that, the rest of the teams, for extended team and other teams surrounding these pods, they were not actually familiar with it. So then what we found actually, and then created some tensions because they're all rightly doing all the jobs that they are asked to do. So what we found that if we actually put these approaches together, what Jon was talking about, and then help them to understand that, in this situation, when we say prototype, then everybody would understand what prototype is. And when person from legal, we're working as a subject matter experts from extended team into core team, and when people in core team say, we are going to do prototype, oh, it's not question, is this something that we actually do and things like that? Do we experiment in the organization? Everybody knows about that. These people should know about it. But what is also important and what we learned, then senior leaders need to be aware of that as well. So then all our leaders went through this training, and now we have for some limited period of time, our senior leaders, including CEO, have design partners working with them and helping them to actually go through this process. So most importantly, we don't have actually intention to turn entire organization into designers. The idea is that people have a common language, that they understand the tools that they're using. And we actually see that it is working, and we are actually using that in the simplest possible way. If we need to go for some specific parts of the organization, we go deep dive and we help people actually, like service designers will build on that because this is just basic stuff. So second enabler is the new risk appetite. What we mean by that is, that we accept the notion that it is important to have these prototypes and in-market tests. And the people need to be comfortable when we actually starting talking about these things. And second thing is placing smaller bets in the market means that again, we try to test these things, but within actually some boundaries. It's not like, infinite space that we can do whatever we think it should possible, or teams can do. So, for example, in our kind of risk assessment, we are saying that there are two main things that we have to have if we go to test with the market. So one is that all this regulatory compliance should be in place. And the second one is that we need to have exit option if we fail on this test. So that teams can't start doing this if they don't have an answer for these two things. So the third one is, unlike startups, large established companies, they have a legacy. They establish their brand reputation, they establish their customer base, and it is risky for them to go to experiment. And I heard that, in many organizations that we visited, that they are saying that's the biggest problem. To what extent, some companies are saying, well, we are going to smaller markets and test this because we don't want to actually put big risk in our main markets, for example. But what we think it is important that actually, when we do these experiments, we do high fidelity front end, and then low fidelity back end. So the example what we're doing in AMP is that in new initiative which we call live services, we created these services on our website and people can interact. But we also created small pod in call center, and people are calling this call center and they're interacting and requesting services if they are interested in these services. Instead, we build this call center, small call center, instead of actually building entire platform. And as you imagine, if we build entire platform, it will cost us millions of dollars. But having 5 people 3 months in call center responding on calls doesn't cost millions. So, and that's the kind of point that is important to have these kind of two connections for large organizations, established organizations, to minimize the risk, but at the same time understand, is there a demand for this? And the point is to measure the demand. So, and last thing is, what we believe in this phase, while working in the pods with core and extended teams, it is important to focus on measure return on learnings instead of return on investment, because it's too early. We don't know how many widgets, and it's no point to see how many widgets we are going to sell. The point here is, what are we going to learn, why people are engaging with us on this specific offer that we designed for them. And the last thing in terms of enablers is radical transparency. I heard a lot of people talking about importance, people from GE and some other speakers this morning. They're talking about importance of communicating. So in the past, when we started actually building these R&D functions, we actually say they should be in some part of the organization and nobody would know what they are doing. Or we actually put some skunk work team to do some job or project which the rest of the organization doesn't know. So what we found actually that with this implementation pods, it's important that people are transparent. And our teams are going and talking, using brown bag lunches, using these check-in sessions, recording really low resolution videos, using iPhone and creating what do people internally feel about that when they work on these projects. And then distribute that through our internet site and things like that. What you see here on the slide is a kind of different situations when teams are actually briefing the rest of the organization, whoever is interested to hear that. And then there is, on the left-hand side, this is kind of internal chat, debate, what is this, some suggestions for ideas or to consideration and things like that. So what you see here is one of our minimum viable offers that we build called Living Expenses. I can't talk more details because we are testing with this very small number of customers. But what I would say that the benefits applying this implementation pod strategy and in creating these enablers helped us actually to establish some sustainable engine to build these initiatives, which we believe that are focusing on the right problem. So, and also it's helped us understand that if it doesn't create value for customers, and if we recognize that, we should stop doing that. And it helped us to create multiple minimum viable offers and have them in market testing, as well as pipelines of prototypes that we have in place, but not all of these prototypes will go in market testing. So most importantly, we are now shifting mindset of our people and their behaviors, that they realize that they're working through these innovation spaces that we discussed, and then understanding these tools and simplicity of how they can apply in the day-to-day activities create enormous value for them. We trained hundreds of people to date, but most importantly, we're now getting signals that people are very much engaged, what we call customer-centric strategy, and also they are telling us they really understand what is actually customer-centric strategy now.
So here's what's super cool, is this notion of a portfolio of MVOs. So these MVOs are portfolio of pods with MVOs or concepts and offers inside. What this means is that you have a core team that's exposed to the practical use and application of this work. You have an extended team that's working to come in and help, and in some cases they may be on another core team. And as you run these portfolios along with the training, you start to impact the entire organization. You start to get new mindsets, new shifts, and you start to drive customer centricity while creating a stream of offers. The other thing that's important is that these ideas are now able to transition to the business, the optimized, efficient engine that is really good at scale. So we think of this as like a lock in the Panama Canal, right? You have new ideas, they move in as a pod, and you start to build them, you test them, you iterate them, you're tightening your business assumptions, you're getting higher conviction, you're protecting the integrity of the idea, and as leadership starts to gain confidence in it, you reach the high water mark, the lock opens, and that concept can move in for scaling as appropriate. So the long and the short, you got to get these scary zone ideas out. If you're a large established company, the way that you currently work, the way you currently implement is antithetical to that. But if you can find the right methods, the right approach, and the right way to leverage your existing resources and teams, while you can't mitigate the risk entirely of innovation, you can actually shrink the size of the scary zone and start to get ideas out to market in a repeatable and consistent way. Thanks so much.
Yeah.